Hello, everyone. Ray Maeda here for our Qualitative Conversation series. I'm accompanied by Jeff Petrozelli, our Qualitative Research Specialist, and Mark Vagle is here with us. He's going to be talking to us about his book, which was just released. We'll get right to that. The title of the book is Crafting Phenomenological Research, and this is the third edition, Mark, of the book. And we just wanted to give you an opportunity to expose people to the book. And I want to start out with something that's kind of a, a mystery to me to how to convince people to do something when I think about phenomenology. There are lots of folks who know it, people who really grasp a little bit, people who grasp a lot. And then there are folks who say, well, I don't think I'll ever do it. And one of the things I'm wondering right off the bat is what about not just phenomenology, but in particular, your approach in crafting in the book makes this something that people should explore, even if they're not going to become a hardcore phenomenologist, even if they're not going to do a study that is strictly phenomenological in nature. So how any qualitative inquiry expert, burgeoning expert benefit from the content you put forth in the book?
Thanks, Ray. Appreciate you both having me today to talk about the book a bit. So I'll open with a response to that question is, in some people around the world, less so in the U.S., and so that's part of, I think, part of the challenge sometimes with phenomenology. But there's people like throughout Europe and in particular, uh, in certain countries as well, the UK being one. I've heard from colleagues in these various countries that phenomenology is actually there treated as more of the philosophical foundation in early qualitative research in particular. So in that respect, then it makes some sense that throughout the world, people might want to learn a bit about phenomenology for the purpose of its historical place as a foundation for qualitative inquiry. And then they may or may not use phenomenology as a methodology. In the book, and when I teach this course, and when I teach research methodologies more broadly here at the University of Minnesota, I tend to use a framework of 30,000 feet, 10,000 feet, and on the ground. And at 30,000 feet is the philosophy, the big theories that undergird various qualitative methodologies. Those could be also epistemologies, as in what it is to know, ontologies, what it is to be. And that's like the 30,000 feet. So phenomenology for sure resides there because it's first and foremost a philosophy, a Western philosophy. And so that might be where people engage it. And then they go do another, what I put at 10,000 feet are the methodologies, phenomenology, hermeneutics, ethnography, grounded theory, case study, the list goes on, right? Critical discourse analysis, right? And all sorts of other methodologies. And that might be where people depart from phenomenology. So I think it would be useful, especially the first half of the book, for folks who want more of that 30,000 feet, as that might ground and animate part of what they do in other methodologies. And then for people who want to use phenomenology or hermeneutics, then the remainder of the book goes at the 10,000 feet about phenomenology, and the on the ground metaphor is like literally what you do, right? Designing research questions, identifying participants, data collection processes, analysis processes and strategies, so on and so forth. So yeah, and the book's in its third edition, and excited that it is.
Yeah. And it's interesting when you talk about that last part of the book in terms of the doing. In my experience over the years, working with people with qualitative research who didn't identify that they were doing a phenomenological project, had no idea that it could benefit, I would also urge people to at least take a cruise through the how to, the doing pieces and step back a bit and say, how can I at least take some of the logics here, if not the direct practices? Because it really the way you present this is really kind of I've just have the expression opening up that I
Mm,
think can result from people seeing your presentation of inaction, phenomenology in action.
yeah,
So,
cool.
yeah,
Great.
I want to do something we could have opened with, but I wanted to just really invite a broad audience of folks into thinking about the book. To me, having gotten to know you over the years, it makes so much sense that this is your book. And I was just hoping you could, by way of giving a little bit more of an introduction to yourself, what brought you to the place where your name's on the cover of this book?
Hmm. Yeah, great question. This is the timing's perfect for this interview and this
Yeah.
question because I'm teaching the phenomenology course at the University of Minnesota this semester. So just had our first session. So a lot of this was I'd frame and when I introduced the class, uh, and I in my doctoral program 2002 to 2006. I I got to know phenomenology a bit. I was exploring, like we're asked to explore a lot of methodologies and philosophies. This one I couldn't figure out why right away, but it definitely spoke to me. And then there were all sorts of varied opinions, as there often are in departments and programs from professors who practice different kinds of philosophies and methodologies on whether phenomenology is a good one to use or what what its limitations are, which of course every school of thought has limitations and strengths and such. So I explored it, kind of tried to fight it a little bit at the beginning, and then kind of like and gave in, and said I'm going to really go after this. Got a good chance to study with some now retired but still active phenomenologists, Max Van Manen and Karin Dahlberg. Max in Canada and Karin in Sweden, and got really good depth there from people who not only practice it, but write about it, present about it, theorize it, debate about it, right? Engage all sorts of people, mentor. And then I just kind of kept rolling. I had no intent when I started my career at the University of Georgia to have writing about and teaching and mentoring and working with Research Talk to teach courses on around phenomenology. When I started my career, I just kind of I like would write an article about like how to do phenomenology and some of the puzzlings and wonderings I experienced, and that kind of took off. And then I ended up in a conversation with an editor, Mitch Allen, about publishing the first book. And so started working with Mitch, pulled together a lot of resources, launched that book, and decided with Mitch's help, like to write the book like I'm teaching the course. And so the book has this movement, has always, from the first edition through this edition, of ushering people in to complicated ideas in hopefully as concrete and accessible ways as possible. A lot of examples, a lot of examples of other people applying the work, a lot of resources. So when some aspect, some type of phenomenology speaks to people, they can like follow that thread. And I try to provide, like here's where you can go, like breadcrumb this to other
Uh-huh.
resources. And that the book builds that way from philosophy, epistemology, ontology, then to methodology. Then the last section is a brand of phenomenology I developed called post-intentional phenomenology, um, PIP for short. And so, in each edition, and this third edition in particular, that's the section that keeps getting updated the most. And then I update throughout the first two sections of the book with some new examples, new resources, and update there. And this latest edition reflects like a second way to design and carry out and analyze post-intentional phenomenological data. And I leave both in there, both a more kind of typical five component process that would look quite a bit like other kinds of research designs and qualitative research, and then a more like open, spacious, flowy, that I call the PIP triangle. That's new in this third edition.
So post-intentional phenomenology, for folks who are hearing that for the first time, if you can just give a couple of sentences to kind of
Sure.
bring them to that term.
Sure. So what I've done is I've taken some commitments and concepts in post-structural philosophies and concepts from phenomenology, and I've woven them together. And it's produced some other kind of like ways of thinking about the phenomenological, or maybe their extensions off earlier work is maybe a better way to say it. And a couple of those is that the phenomenon in post-intentional phenomenology is thought to be partial and fleeting and moving and deeply influenced by context. Whereas other conceptions of the phenomenon and other kinds of phenomenology have treated the phenomenon as affected by context, but it having a little more stability in time and space, not being kind of final, but a little more stable, I would argue. And so like that's one difference. And then the way data is treated, what I'm now calling phenomenological material, is treated as a process of moving among, like back and forth in a more like in a different, maybe a little bit of different kind of rhythm, where you're not working toward finding like the essence or themes as much as finding like little pieces of deep insight at one moment, and then more kind of robust insights the next, and not being too concerned about how thin one insight is, or what I call provocation or production, and then how robust the next one is, and just following where that takes you.
What you're doing here, and when you were, of course, talking about what you brought to the third edition, answers a question Jeff and I get a lot when folks ask us for advice on their qualitative library. And one of the things that, frankly, can sometimes frustrate folks, but they don't know what to do is, okay, so I have this book, it's on my shelf, I have the second edition, I have the first, maybe I have both. Do I buy the third? Why would someone who owns the first and the second, why should they buy the third? And kind of a maybe just you've already given us pieces of it, but soundbite that for us. So here's what
Good.
really sells the third.
Yeah, so in the third edition, the big get or gain is that in the third section, an expansion of the post-intentional phenomenology. In the first and second sections, the big get there is updated examples and paths to follow throughout the first two sections that aren't present not in the same way in the first and second. Those are the two big takeaways, and where that matters, that second point, I think, is seeing the updated ways people, contemporary phenomenologists, are making sense of and trying on different kinds of phenomenology, and hearing a little bit about it in the book, and then following that path is a good thing, I think, in this third edition.
And then post-intentional phenomenology, what are the next steps for that?
Great question. So I'm working on a book that's all post-intentional phenomenology. It'll have some, its vibe will be similar to crafting,
Uh,
but I'm doing a few different things. So PIP has been around now for about 15 years since I first published my first articles and presentations in 2010. So I guess it is literally 15 years. And so it's started to have kind of, there's like types of pip now too, which I don't go into depth in the crafting book, but I'm going to go into depth, walk all the way through like the history and grounding of pip, that it's become a tradition, different ways people have taken it up, and then I'm organizing by like different kinds of pip. There's pip in general, there's the pip triangle. I'm writing about a more contemplative pip where I'm integrating yoga, mindfulness, energy work, and also a critical pip, really informed by critical theory with a number of colleagues that I've worked with around any numbers of isms, race and racism in particular. So a number of faculty of color I've worked with over time. And then I'm inviting even more people to contribute where it's not only a little snippet or snapshot of how they've applied PIP, it's more expansive where that more of their work is present so the reader can follow key moments that those contributors have decided to share and have published here. And then I take different kind of like stances as an author where in one part of the book I'm literally going to have an excerpt from a contributor and then I will provide commentary to the reader almost akin to like tapping the reader on the shoulder and then saying, hey, like notice what
Yeah.
the scholar did right here. This is super interesting. I'm
Uh-huh.
fascinated by the way they took it up, and here's why. And then boom, move to another part of the excerpt. So that's going to be present throughout the PIP book, and that should be out early 2026.
Great, cool. Yeah, so Jeff, as we think about kind of closing out this conversation, it's just I know a lot of this, Mark and I have conversations. I know a lot of this is the first time you're hearing the depth of this content.
After taking some philosophy courses when I was much younger, I appreciate the kind of the philosophical bent behind what you're doing. And I think it's I think when people talk about thinking qualitatively, which is a term that we hear quite a bit, I think the work that you're doing is is a great way to really consider that thought process of how we can think qualitatively. So, I do think it's a very important topic that, again, as we mentioned earlier, whether you consider yourself a phenomenologist or not, I think it's a very important book, to read and a subject to really consider.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, thank you so much for your time, Mark. And for those of you who are interested in learning more about ways to engage with Mark's wisdom and kind of learn and integrate some of the ideas he's brought to his own work, we have a course he's offering this summer at our Qualitative Research Summer Intensive. You can learn more about that, our upcoming events page. We'll have a slide about that here. And we'll also have another recording with more information about a whole other step in Mark's professional offerings. So keep an eye out for that. So thank you very much, and we will keep chatting. So thank y'all.
Great, thank you.